Zorgamazoo by Robert Paul Weston.
Here is a story that's stranger than strange. Before we begin, you may want to arrange a blanket, a cushion, a comfortable seat, and maybe some cocoa and something to eat. I'll warn you, of course, before we commence, my story is eerie and full of suspense, brimming with danger and narrow escapes, and creatures of many remarkable shapes. Dragons and ogres and gorgons and more, and creatures you've not even heard of before. And faraway places, there's plenty of those, and menacing villains to tingle your toes. So ready your mettle and steady your heart. It's time for my story's mysterious start. We begin in a subway under the ground where people in trains go rolling around, in hurrying haste and in scurrying mobs, wandering off to their ponderous jobs. Much of the time they would linger in vain. They would stand in the station awaiting a train. They would push in between the ticket machines like fish huddled in to a tin of sardines. They clutched at their purses and cases they brought, anxious and angry and overly wrought, hoping a train would come barreling past, pick them up quick and dash away fast. There was one little girl who waited as well, a girl by the name of Katrina Cottrell. While everyone else was busy or bored, this one little girl should not be ignored. For unlike the crowd, she was never inert. Her senses were sharp, awake and alert. She kept to herself, but she wasn't alone. She was joined by her guardian, Mrs. Crabone, who stood with Katrina, clutching her hand in the flickering light of the passenger stand. They were hunched near the tunnel of mortar and brick, where the lightning was dim and shadows were thick, where Katrina was curious, squinting her eye. She could swear that a creature was shuffling by. At first it was vague, just a shadowy form, like a ship in a mist or the fog of a storm. So she gaped with a steady, unfaltering stare to determine for certain, was anything there? Yet try as she might, the tunnel was black, obscuring the path of the train and the track. She nearly was ready to give up her search when the subway arrived in a lumbering lurch. It showered the station in glimmering light, and that's when she saw something scurry from sight. "Hey, Crabby," she whispered, "there's something I see. It's smaller than you, but it's bigger than me. It's looping around in the tunnel, I swear. It looks like a warthog or maybe a bear." "Don't call me Crabby," spat Mrs. Crabone in a violent and rather vociferous tone. "You're a fool and a fibber," the woman accused, "and such ludicrous lying is never excused." You see, my good reader, this had happened before. Since Katrina Cottrell, well, she loved to explore. On her way home from school, whenever she could, she would cut through a park or a forested wood. And more often than not, in some part of a park where no one else went, or perhaps after dark, she would see something strange, something utterly odd, something hulking or hairy, and possibly clawed. She then would run home with a story to tell, where Mrs. Crabone would do nothing but yell. "Katrina," she'd holler, "you ignorant thing! Your brain must be made out of paper and string. All this rot about yetis and monsters in locks, they're nothing but lies, they're nothing but crocs." Old Crabby, you see, was a bit of a witch. In the pit of her heart was a serious glitch. She didn't have time for the fanciful things, like pirates and gadgets and creatures and kings. She believed that a girl should be perfectly prim, and shouldn't be guided by whimsy and whim. As such, she was certain Katrina was nuts, too lively, too feisty, and too full of guts. Yet the two were related. Yes, that much was true. But how they were linked? Well, nobody knew. The relation was distant, hard to define, yet connected somehow by a family line. Like 41st cousins, 10 times removed. The bloodline, however, had never been proved. What do you think Katrina saw in the tunnel? How do you think Katrina and Old Krabby are related? These questions and more will be answered in our next episode of
Zorgamazoo!